As the video begins, the screen fades in from black, revealing a dimly lit room illuminated only by the flickering light of a single candle. The shadows dance across the walls, creating a sinister atmosphere that immediately puts the viewer on edge. The camera slowly pans across the room, focusing on ancient dust-covered artifacts scattered on a large wooden table. Among them, partially hidden beneath a tattered cloth, is the object of our story. A mysterious, weathered relic that seems to pulse with an eerie energy. There are some things in this world that were never meant to be found. A low, gravelly voice begins, resonating with a tone of ominous forewarning. Some secrets, buried deep in the earth, should have remained untouched, undisturbed, forgotten. The voice pauses, allowing the weight of the words to settle in the air, creating a palpable sense of dread. The viewer is drawn in, curiosity piqued, yet instinctively aware that something dark lies ahead. The camera zooms in on the relic, now fully revealed. It is an ancient object, its surface etched with strange symbols that seem to shift and writhe in the dim light. The voice continues. Tonight, you will hear the story of a man who ignored the warnings, who let his curiosity lead him down a path from which there was no return. A man who, in his quest for knowledge, unleashed something far more terrifying than he could ever imagine. A brief pause follows, allowing the tension to build. The candle flickers violently, as if reacting to an unseen force, casting monstrous shapes on the walls. This is not just a story, the voice warns, but a glimpse into the abyss, where the line between reality and nightmare begins to blur, and where the echoes of ancient horrors still linger. What you are about to witness is a tale of terror, a descent into madness that will challenge your very perception of reality. The screen flashes with quick, unsettling images, the protagonist's haunted eyes, a flash of a darkened corridor, and the relic glowing with a malevolent light. Each image is accompanied by a jarring sound designed to unsettle the viewer, to heighten their sense of fear and anticipation. The voice lowers to a whisper. Prepare yourself. For once you've seen what lies ahead, you may never see the world the same way again. The camera cuts to a close-up of the relic, its strange symbols now glowing ominously. The screen fades to black, and the title of the video, The Forbidden Relic, appears in blood-red letters, dripping slowly as if etched in fresh wounds. The voice delivers the final, chilling line. Like the man in our story, you too have been warned, and yet you stay. So, let us begin. A call to action follows, seamlessly woven into the narrative. If you dare to continue, if you wish to delve deeper into this tale of horror, like this video, subscribe to Mind's Labyrinth and share it with those who crave stories that test the limits of their sanity. But remember, some doors, once opened, can never be closed. As the story unfolds, the viewer is transported to a remote, forgotten corner of the world. The screen shows an aerial view of dense, overgrown jungles that seem to stretch endlessly in every direction. A sea of green hiding countless secrets beneath its thick canopy. The camera descends, pushing through the suffocating foliage, until it reveals a clearing where an ancient temple lies in ruin. This is the setting of our tale, a place shrouded in mystery and foreboding, where the very air feels heavy with the weight of untold centuries. The temple, once grand and majestic, now stands as a decaying monument to a civilization long lost to time. Vines snake up its crumbling walls, and the stone steps leading to its entrance are cracked and uneven, as if the earth itself is trying to reclaim what was once taken. The sky above is overcast, with thick clouds hanging low, casting a gloomy pallor over the scene. The only sounds are the distant cries of unseen animals and the whispering of the wind through the trees. A sound that seems almost like voices murmuring secrets long forgotten. Our protagonist, the voice narrates, an archaeologist obsessed with uncovering the past, has ventured far beyond the reach of modern civilization to this forsaken place. He has spent years searching for this temple, driven by tales of an ancient relic said to possess unimaginable power. But what he does not know, what none before him have understood, is that some things are meant to remain buried. And in his hubris, he has come to a place where even the gods feared to tread. The camera follows the archaeologist as he steps cautiously into the temple. Inside, the darkness is almost absolute, broken only by the faint beam of a flashlight cutting through the thick, dusty air. The walls of the temple are adorned with strange carvings, depicting scenes of rituals and sacrifices, figures twisted in agony and worship before towering, otherworldly beings. The further he goes, the more oppressive the atmosphere becomes, as if the very walls are closing in on him, each step taking him deeper into a place that has not seen light for millennia. This is not a place for the living. The voice intones, a cold chill creeping into the words. The deeper he delves, the more the darkness seems to come alive, watching, waiting, like a predator stalking its prey. Every corner turned reveals more of the temple's malevolent history, each image carved into the stone a warning, a message from those who came before and never left. The archaeologist reaches the heart of the temple, a vast chamber that defies the logic of the space he has traveled through. The room is impossibly large, its ceiling lost in shadows far above. In the center of this chamber, atop a pedestal of black stone, rests the relic he has sought for so long. It is a small, unassuming object, yet it seems to pulse with a life of its own, an unnatural light emanating from the strange symbols etched into its surface. The air around it is cold despite the stifling heat of the jungle outside, and the archaeologist can feel his breath misting in front of him. But this is no ordinary relic, the voice warns. It is a key, a gateway to something far older and far darker than even the temple that houses it. As he reaches out to touch it, a sense of dread washes over him, a primal fear that screams at him to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But the lure of discovery, the thrill of the unknown, is too strong. And so, with a trembling hand, he grasps the relic, sealing his fate. The camera lingers on the moment his fingers make contact, the light from the relic flaring briefly before fading to an ominous glow. The room seems to shudder, the ground beneath his feet trembling as if something deep within the earth has awakened. The carvings on the walls begin to shift, the figures moving subtly, their eyes following the archaeologist as he quickly retreats, the relic now clutched tightly in his hand. As he exits the temple, the jungle seems darker, more hostile, as if the very land has turned against him. The once familiar sounds of nature are now distorted, twisted into something unrecognizable, and the path he took to reach the temple seems longer, more treacherous. He stumbles, nearly falling as the ground gives way beneath him, a sign that the earth is rejecting him, trying to prevent his escape with the relic. But he pushes on, driven by fear and the compulsion to understand what he has unleashed. He has taken what was never meant to be found, the voice concludes. And as the shadows lengthen and the day begins to die, he realizes too late that the relic has already begun to work its terrible magic. What he thought was a treasure, an artifact of immense value, is in truth a curse, a tether to something far more ancient and malevolent than he could ever imagine. The scene ends with the archaeologist emerging from the jungle, the relic in hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of triumph and terror. But as he looks back at the temple, now hidden once more by the thick vegetation, the camera catches a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. Something that wasn't there before. The screen fades to black, leaving the viewer with the unsettling knowledge that whatever was inside that temple is now free, and it is following him home. The story picks up as the archaeologist returns home, a sense of unease gnawing at him despite the apparent success of his expedition. His house, once a sanctuary filled with books, maps, and relics of past discoveries, now feels different, alien, as if the walls themselves are watching him. The relic, now placed on a shelf in his study, seems to pulse with a faint, eerie glow, casting long, twisted shadows that dance across the room in ways that defy logic. It began with small things. The voice narrates, the tone low and unsettling. Things that could easily be dismissed if it weren't for the gnawing sense of dread that accompanied them. The camera shows the archaeologist going about his routine, trying to return to normalcy, but the signs of something amiss are everywhere. Books that were once neatly stacked now lie scattered on the floor as if thrown in a fit of anger. Despite no one else being in the house, lights flicker at odd intervals, and the air grows colder in rooms where the relic is present. At first, he tried to rationalize it. The voice continues, blaming it on exhaustion, on the toll of his journey, but deep down, he knew that the relic had brought something back with it, something that didn't belong in this world. The archaeologist begins to experience strange, vivid dreams, fragments of ancient rituals, chants in a language he doesn't understand, and shadowy figures that seem to reach out to him from the depths of his subconscious. Each morning, he wakes up drenched in sweat, his heart racing, with a feeling that he's not alone. He began to notice other things too. The voice whispers, the tension in the story mounting, fleeting shadows that shouldn't be there, voices calling his name in the dead of night, echoes that seem to come from the very walls of his home. The archaeologist starts hearing faint whispers, so quiet that he initially thinks it's just the wind. But as the days go by, the whispers grow louder, more distinct. They seem to be speaking in the same ancient language from his dreams, a language that fills him with an inexplicable sense of dread. The camera shows the archaeologist standing in front of a mirror, his reflection staring back at him with a haunted expression. But as he turns away, the reflection doesn't move. It remains fixed, watching him with eyes that no longer seem his own. A chill runs down his spine as he slowly turns back to the mirror, only to see his reflection moving a fraction of a second too late, as if it's mimicking his actions rather than reflecting them. His breath hitches and he stumbles backward, knocking over a lamp in his panic. And then the memories began to blur. The voice narrates as the screen flashes through distorted images of the archaeologist's daily life. Him reading a book, the pages slowly filling with the strange symbols from the relic, or him talking on the phone, only to hear his own voice echoing back at him with a twisted, mocking tone. He would find himself standing in a room with no recollection of how he got there, or staring at the relic for hours, unable to tear his eyes away from the shifting symbols. The archaeologist's mental state begins to deteriorate. He becomes paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at the slightest sound. He starts keeping all the lights on in the house, but no amount of illumination can chase away the feeling of something lurking in the shadows. At night, he hears footsteps echoing down the hall, stopping just outside his bedroom door. But when he musters the courage to open the door, there's nothing there, only the lingering scent of earth and decay. The relic was no longer just an artifact. The voice reveals it had become a beacon, a tether to something ancient and malevolent, something that was slowly worming its way into his life, his mind, his very soul. One day, as he sits in his study, trying to make sense of the inscriptions on the relic, the room suddenly grows darker, the shadows pooling together as if drawn by an unseen force. The whispers return, louder and more insistent, filling his ears with their relentless chant. He covers his ears, trying to block them out, but they seem to come from within his own mind, echoing in his thoughts. Desperate, the archaeologist decides to get rid of the relic, to banish it from his home and his life. But as he reaches for it, the relic suddenly burns with a searing cold, freezing his hand in place. He gasps, the pain shooting through his body. And in that moment, he sees a vision, an ancient ritual, with figures in dark robes chanting around the relic, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. They look up at him, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of hatred and hunger, and he realizes with a jolt of terror that they are aware of him, that they have been watching him all along. It was no longer a question of if he would succumb. The voice concludes ominously. But when? The relic had chosen him, marked him, and it would not rest until it had consumed him completely. The archaeologist stumbles back, clutching his hand, the cold from the relic spreading through his veins like ice. He knows now that there is no escape, that the relic has bound him to something far darker than he ever imagined. The room around him seems to warp, the walls closing in, the shadows growing longer, as the relic pulses with a dark light that bathes everything in a sickly glow. The scene ends with the archaeologist sitting in the darkness of his study, the relic on the table before him, his breath ragged and his eyes wide with terror. He is trapped, a prisoner of the very object he sought, and the whispers now fill the room, a constant, maddening drone that threatens to drown out his sanity. The screen fades to black, leaving the viewer with the chilling realization that the true horror has only just begun. The days begin to blur together for the archaeologist, each one dragging him deeper into a pit of despair and confusion. The relic, which once seemed like a crowning achievement, now feels like a curse, a constant weight pressing down on his mind. He starts to lose track of time, waking up in the middle of the night with no memory of having gone to bed, his sheets soaked in cold sweat. The once familiar walls of his home, filled with relics and artifacts from his past expeditions, now seem like the walls of a prison closing in around him. His mind was no longer his own. The voice in tones, the tone heavy with dread. It was as if the relic had reached inside him, pulling at the strings of his sanity, twisting his thoughts until he could no longer tell what was real and what was illusion. The archaeologist's internal struggle intensifies as he begins to question everything around him. His reflection in the mirror, once a comforting sight, now stares back at him with eyes that seem hollow and alien. He avoids mirrors whenever possible, but every time he catches a glimpse of himself, he feels a deep, unsettling fear that the person he's seeing is not entirely human anymore. His thoughts, once clear and focused, become a chaotic mess of paranoia and dread. He hears voices whispering in languages he doesn't understand, sees fleeting shadows at the corners of his vision that vanish the moment he turns to look. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside sends a jolt of fear through him. He begins to believe that something is watching him, waiting for him to let his guard down, but he can never quite catch it. The tension is unbearable, like a predator stalking its prey, and he feels like he's slowly being hunted by an invisible force. His trust in the world around him began to erode. The voice narrates, but worse still, his trust in himself began to crumble. Every decision, every thought was tainted by doubt, by the creeping fear that he was losing control. The archaeologist starts second-guessing everything he does. Did he lock the door? He checks it once, twice, 3 times, but still he isn't sure. Did he hear something just now, or was it his imagination? He holds his breath, straining to listen, but the silence is deafening, and the uncertainty gnaws at him like a disease. The camera shows him sitting at his desk, his hands shaking as he tries to write down his thoughts, to make sense of the chaos in his mind. But the words on the page seem to twist and warp, the letters rearranging themselves into unfamiliar patterns, symbols that remind him of the ones on the relic. He throws the pen down in frustration, staring at the paper as if it's mocking him. The relic's presence is inescapable, even when he isn't looking at it, even when he isn't in the same room. It's in his thoughts, in his dreams, in the very air he breathes. The walls of his mind, once so solid and unyielding, began to crack. The voice whispers, the tension in the story growing palpable. And through those cracks, the darkness seeped in, filling him with a terror that he could not shake, a fear that he could no longer control. The archaeologist begins to experience lapses in memory. Hours, sometimes entire days, lost in a fog of confusion. He finds himself in places with no memory of how he got there, holding objects he doesn't remember picking up. The most disturbing of these episodes occurs when he wakes up in the middle of the night, standing in front of the relic, his hand outstretched towards it, as if in a trance. His internal monologues become more frantic, more desperate. He questions whether the things he's seeing and hearing are real or just figments of his crumbling mind. But every time he tries to convince himself that it's all in his head, something happens. Another whisper in the darkness. Another shadow moving where there should be none. That shatters his fragile grip on reality. He starts to avoid sleep, fearing what he might do, or what might happen, if he loses consciousness again. But the exhaustion only makes things worse, blurring the line between waking and dreaming until he can no longer tell the difference. He began to distrust his own senses. The voice says, every sound, every shadow, every fleeting image became suspect, a potential threat. And the more he tried to fight it, the stronger the fear grew, until it consumed him whole. The archaeologist isolates himself, avoiding contact with the outside world, convinced that no one else could understand what he's going through. But this isolation only deepens his paranoia. He starts to hear knocks at his door late at night, but when he checks, there's no one there. His phone rings, but when he answers, there's only silence on the other end, or worse, a faint, distant breathing. The camera follows him as he begins to unravel completely, his mind a battleground where fear and reason clash violently, with fear slowly gaining the upper hand. He talks to himself, trying to reason through the madness, but his voice trembles with the weight of his dread. He sees things that shouldn't be there, faces in the shadows, figures standing at the foot of his bed, watching him, with eyes that gleam in the dark. But when he turns on the light, they're gone, leaving him to wonder if they were ever there at all. The darkness inside him grew. The voice concludes, a living, breathing entity that fed on his fear, on his doubts, until there was nothing left but the terror, the overwhelming certainty that he was no longer in control of his own mind. The archaeologist's distrust reaches its peak as he begins to fear not just the relic, but himself. He locks away all his sharp objects, afraid of what he might do in a moment of weakness. He avoids mirrors, terrified of what he might see staring back at him. The relic, still glowing faintly in his study, seems to pulse with a dark energy, as if feeding on his fear, growing stronger with each passing day. The scene ends with the archaeologist sitting in a corner of his darkened room, knees drawn to his chest, eyes wide with terror. The relic sits on the table across from him, glowing softly, its symbols shifting in the dim light. He whispers to himself, trying to hold on to the last shreds of his sanity, but the words are incoherent, lost in the storm of fear and confusion raging in his mind. The camera slowly zooms in on the relic, its glow intensifying as the screen fades to black, leaving the viewer with the unsettling realization that the true horror is not the relic itself, but what it is doing to the man who possesses it. The archaeologist's descent into madness reaches a tipping point. The relic's presence, once merely unsettling, has now become unbearable. A dark, pulsating core of malevolence that seems to radiate terror into every corner of his life. The boundaries of his sanity, stretched thin by the relentless barrage of whispers, shadows, and creeping dread, finally snap. He knows that he can no longer live like this, teetering on the edge of reality, haunted by the relic and the horrors it has unleashed. There comes a time when fear is no longer enough to keep the darkness at bay. The voice narrates, heavy with foreboding, when the only choice left is to face the terror head-on, to confront the source of your nightmares, even if it means stepping into the abyss. The archaeologist, driven by a desperate need to end his torment, decides that the relic must be destroyed. He reasons that, if he can break it, perhaps he can sever the connection to whatever dark force it has awakened. But deep down, a part of him knows that this confrontation will not be so simple, that the relic will not be easily relinquished. The scene is set late at night, the house shrouded in darkness, with only the faintest sliver of moonlight filtering through the windows. The camera follows the archaeologist as he moves through the house, his footsteps eerily silent on the wooden floorboards. His hands shake as he grips a heavy hammer, his knuckles white from the pressure. The relic sits on the table in his study, glowing softly, almost mockingly, as if daring him to try. He could feel it watching him. The voice whispers, The relic was alive with a terrible consciousness, aware of his every move, every thought. It knew what he intended to do, and it was ready. The archaeologist stands over the relic, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he raises the hammer above his head. The shadows in the room seem to converge around him, closing in like a pack of predators circling their prey. The whispers in his mind grow louder, more insistent, a cacophony of ancient voices pleading, threatening, cursing. The moment stretches out, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Just as he is about to bring the hammer down, the lights flicker violently, plunging the room into total darkness. The whispers swell to a deafening roar, and the room feels as if it's spinning around him, the walls warping and distorting in impossible ways. The air grows thick, suffocating, as if the house itself is reacting to his defiance. The archaeologist's grip falters, and the hammer slips from his grasp, clattering to the floor with a sound that echoes far longer than it should. But it was not just the darkness he faced. The voice intones, the terror mounting. It was the relic's true power, a force far beyond human comprehension, something ancient and unspeakable that had been waiting for this moment. The room seems to expand and contract, the very fabric of reality bending as the relic's glow intensifies, casting long, twisted shadows that writhe like living things. The archaeologist stumbles back, his eyes wide with terror as he sees the shadows detach themselves from the walls, taking on grotesque, semi-human forms that lurch towards him with inhuman speed. He scrambles to his feet, heart pounding in his chest as he tries to escape the room, but the door slams shut with a force that rattles the entire house. The shadows close in around him, their forms shifting and merging, their eyes, empty voids of pure darkness, locked onto him with a malevolent hunger. The whispers in his mind have become screams, incoherent and maddening, driving spikes of pain through his skull. He clutches his head, trying to block out the noise, but it's no use. The sound is inside him, a part of him. There was no escape, the voice says, its tone final and despairing. The relic had claimed him, and now he would confront the true horror that had been unleashed. In a final act of desperation, the archaeologist lunges for the relic, intending to throw it to the ground, to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. But as his hands close around it, the relic's glow flares with a blinding light, and a searing pain shoots through his entire body. He screams, a raw, primal sound that reverberates through the house as the light envelops him, pulling him into the very heart of the relic's darkness. The camera captures the moment in slow motion, his body suspended in the air, contorted in agony as the shadows swarm over him, their dark tendrils wrapping around his limbs, pulling him down into the inky blackness. The relic pulses violently, its symbols shifting at an impossible speed, as if trying to communicate some terrible truth. The archaeologist's screams are cut off abruptly as he is pulled into the relic, his body dissolving into the light, leaving nothing but an echo of his terror in the still air. And then, there was silence. The voice narrates, the room now eerily calm. The relic, once a beacon of dark power, now sat quietly on the table, its glow dimmed as if sated by the soul it had consumed. The camera lingers on the relic, the room now empty, save for the faint traces of darkness that linger in the corners like the remnants of a terrible storm. The house is quiet, but the atmosphere is heavy with the lingering presence of what has just occurred. The relic sits on the table, innocent and unassuming, as if it had never moved, never glowed, never devoured the man who sought to destroy it. The screen fades to black, the viewer left in stunned silence. The only sound, the faint whisper of the wind outside. But even in the darkness, the relic's presence is felt, a reminder that some things cannot be confronted, cannot be destroyed, and that the true horror lies not in the act of facing the unknown, but in the realization that the unknown is far more powerful, far more ancient, and far more insidious than we could ever imagine. The air in the room grows thick, oppressive, as if the very atmosphere is charged with a malevolent energy. The archaeologist, now consumed by the terror he has unleashed, stands at the precipice of a horrifying revelation. The relic's glow pulsates with an intensity that bathes the room in an eerie, otherworldly light. The shadows twist and writhe on the walls, their movements unnatural, almost sentient, as if they are aware of the dreadful truth that is about to be revealed. It was in this moment, the voice intones, the weight of impending doom heavy in its tone, that the full horror of the relic's true nature was laid bare, and the archaeologist realized the terrible mistake he had made. The relic, now pulsating violently, begins to emit a low, resonant hum that vibrates through the very core of the house. The walls seem to pulse in time with the relic, and the archaeologist can feel the vibrations deep in his bones, shaking him to his core. He knows that something is coming, something ancient and unspeakable, something that the relic has been calling forth all along. As the hum grows louder, more insistent, the archaeologist's mind is bombarded with images. Flashes of the ancient civilization that once worshipped the relic, their twisted rituals, their fervent prayers to dark, forgotten gods. He sees them, clad in dark robes, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks, chanting in unison as they raise the relic above their heads. The symbols on the relic glow with the same eerie light that now fills his room, and the ground beneath them trembles as if in response to their dark invocations. The relic was not just an artifact, the voice reveals. It was a gateway, a conduit to a power far beyond human comprehension. It was never meant to be found, never meant to be touched, for it held within it the essence of an ancient force, one that had been sealed away for millennia. The camera zooms in on the relic as it begins to levitate, hovering above the table, spinning slowly as the symbols on its surface shift and morph into new, unrecognizable forms. The light from the relic grows brighter, blinding, as the air around it distorts, bending reality itself. The archaeologist staggers back, his eyes wide with terror, as he watches the relic begin to crack, fissures forming along its surface, releasing tendrils of dark energy that snake through the air. The room fills with a low, guttural growl that seems to emanate from the very depths of the earth, a sound so primal, so ancient, that it sends a shiver of pure, unadulterated fear down his spine. He tries to turn away, to flee, but his legs refuse to move, as if rooted to the spot by an unseen force. And then, the truth was revealed. The voice whispers, the tension in the story reaching its peak. The relic was a prison, a vessel that contained a being of unimaginable power, a creature so ancient, so malevolent, that even the gods had feared it. And now that prison was breaking. The seals that had held it for so long were shattering, and the creature within was awakening. The camera shows the relic as it finally breaks apart, the pieces disintegrating into dust that swirls through the air like ash from a long-dead fire. From within the relic, a dark, shapeless form begins to emerge, a swirling mass of shadows and energy that pulses with an evil that defies description. The archaeologist watches in horror as the form takes shape, a towering figure, its body composed of pure darkness with eyes like burning coals that pierce through the soul. The creature's presence is overwhelming, a force of nature that bends the very fabric of reality around it. The walls of the room warp and twist, the floor buckling beneath its weight as if, the house itself is being pulled into the void from which the creature came. The archaeologist can feel his mind unraveling, his thoughts disintegrating into chaos as the creature's gaze locks onto him. It was then that he understood, the voice says, its tone filled with dread. The relic had not been a mere artifact of power. It had been a warning, a seal that kept this ancient horror at bay, and in his hubris he had unleashed it upon the world. The creature steps forward, its movements fluid, almost graceful, yet filled with an undeniable menace. The air around it crackles with dark energy, distorting the light, casting twisted, impossible shadows that seem to reach out towards the archaeologist. He tries to scream, but no sound escapes his lips, his voice stolen by the sheer terror that grips him. The creature speaks, its voice a deep, resonant growl that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The language is ancient, incomprehensible, yet the archaeologist understands its meaning all too well. It speaks of hunger, of vengeance, of a darkness that has waited eons to be free. And now, thanks to the archaeologist's foolishness, it is free to spread its evil across the world once more. In that moment, the archaeologist knew. The voice whispers, the finality of the revelation sinking in. There was no escape, no redemption. He had doomed not just himself, but the entire world. The creature would not rest until it had consumed everything, until the darkness it emadad had swallowed the light of the world whole. The archaeologist falls to his knees, his body trembling as the creature looms over him, its presence suffocating, all-consuming. The room around him collapses inward, the walls cracking, the ceiling buckling, as the creature's dark energy tears apart the very foundations of reality. The camera focuses on the archaeologist's face, contorted in a mask of pure terror, as the creature reaches out with a tendril of shadow, touching his forehead. The moment of contact sends a jolt of dark energy through his body, his eyes rolling back in his head as the last vestiges of his sanity are stripped away. He feels himself being pulled into the darkness, his mind, his soul, consumed by the creature's insatiable hunger. The screen flashes with images of destruction, cities crumbling, the sky darkening as the creature's power spreads across the world, unstoppable and all-consuming. And so the world was lost, the voice concludes, filled with a deep, sorrowful finality. The relic, once a beacon of hope, was now the harbinger of doom, and the creature, freed from its ancient prison, would continue its march of destruction until nothing remained but darkness. The screen fades to black, the echoes of the creature's growl lingering in the air, leaving the viewer with the horrifying realization that some evils are beyond comprehension, beyond control, and once unleashed, can never be contained again. The final shot shows the dust of the relic settling on the empty table. The room now a shattered ruin as the camera pulls back to reveal the full scope of the destruction. The house is gone, the land around it scorched and barren, a wasteland where once there had been life. And in the center of it all, the creature stands, its form towering and dark, a symbol of the apocalypse it has begun. The story ends not with hope, but with the knowledge that the world as it was known is gone, consumed by the darkness that the archaeologist, in his quest for knowledge, unleashed upon it. The aftermath of the confrontation leaves the world, and the archaeologist, irrevocably altered. The house, once a place of refuge and knowledge, now lies in ruins, a twisted shell of its former self. The relic, or what's left of it, is nothing more than a fine gray dust that covers the ground like ash after a fire, a grim reminder of the horrors it unleashed. The air is thick with an unnatural silence, the kind that follows a storm of unspeakable magnitude. But this silence is not peaceful. It is filled with dread, as if the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for the next blow to fall. The creature's presence had tainted everything. The voice narrates, the tone somber and heavy with the weight of impending doom. What was once a place of learning, of discovery, was now accursed ground, marked by the darkness that had been set free. The camera pans over the desolate landscape, showing the devastation in its wake. The sky, once a bright, hopeful blue, is now an ominous gray, swirling with dark clouds that seem to seethe with anger. The trees around the property are twisted and gnarled, their leaves blackened and withered, as if drained of life by the mere presence of the creature. The archaeologist, the lone survivor of this catastrophe, emerges from the wreckage. His clothes are torn and dirty, his face pale and gaunt, eyes hollowed out by the horrors he has witnessed. He moves slowly, like a man who has aged 100 years in a single night, his body and mind shattered by the ordeal. Every step he takes is labored, as if the weight of the world is pressing down on him, dragging him deeper into the darkness that now surrounds him. He had survived. The voice whispers, the words filled with a bitter irony. But at what cost? The world he knew was gone, replaced by a nightmare of his own making. The relic, the key to his ruin, was no more. But the darkness it had unleashed was far from finished. The archaeologist stumbles through the ruins of his home, the once familiar surroundings now unrecognizable. The walls are blackened and crumbling, the windows shattered, the floor covered in debris. But more than the physical destruction, it is the atmosphere that has changed. There is a pervasive sense of dread, as if the house itself is alive with malevolent intent, watching his every move. As he moves through the house, the archaeologist is haunted by the echoes of what has happened. He sees flashes of the creature, its dark form looming over him, its burning eyes piercing through the gloom. He hears the whispers that once tormented him, now faint and distant, like the remnants of a bad dream. But these are not just memories. They are imprints left behind by the creature as it tore through reality, leaving scars on the world and on his mind. The archaeologist is no longer sure where the real ends and the nightmare begins. He could feel it. The voice continues, the dread deepening. The darkness was still there, lingering at the edges of his perception, waiting for the right moment to strike again. It had tasted freedom, and it would not be easily contained. The camera follows the archaeologist as he reaches the heart of the house, the place where the relic had once been kept. The room is a hollow shell, the walls scorched and cracked, the furniture reduced to splinters. In the center, where the relic had levitated moments before it shattered, there is now a blackened spot on the floor, a void that seems to suck in the light around it. The archaeologist falls to his knees before this spot, his hands trembling as he reaches out to touch it. The moment his fingers make contact, he recoils in horror. A jolt of dark energy shoots up his arm, and for a brief moment, he sees the creature again, its eyes burning with hatred, its form looming over him, as if waiting for him to make a mistake. He pulls his hand back, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature is gone, but the memory of its presence is enough to send him spiraling back into the depths of his fear. He realized then, the voice whispers, the finality of the revelation sinking in. The darkness was not gone. It had merely receded, retreating to the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The relic may have been destroyed, but the evil it contained was now free, spreading like a poison through the world. The archaeologist rises to his feet, his body trembling, his mind racing with the implications. He knows that he cannot stay here, in this cursed place, but he also knows that there is nowhere he can go to escape the darkness. It will follow him, haunt him, until it consumes him completely. The camera shows him leaving the house, the relic's dust swirling in the wind around him, as if bidding him a final, mocking farewell. As he steps outside, the air feels different, heavier, darker, as if the world itself is under a shroud. The once vibrant landscape is now a twisted, barren wasteland, the grass dead, the trees bare, the sky an ominous gray. The archaeologist looks out over this new world, his eyes filled with a deep, unshakable dread, knowing that this is the world he has unleashed, a world tainted by the darkness he could not control. But the worst realization, the voice says, the words dripping with despair, was that the creature was still out there. It had been freed, and now it would continue its work, spreading its darkness, corrupting everything it touched. The world was no longer safe, and neither was he. The archaeologist knows that he cannot fight it, cannot stop what he has set in motion. All he can do is run, try to stay ahead of the darkness, but deep down, he knows that it is only a matter of time before it catches up to him. The final shot shows the archaeologist walking away from the ruins of his home, his figure small against the vast, desolate landscape. The camera pulls back, revealing the full scope of the destruction. The land around the house is dead, a blight that seems to be spreading outward, like a disease. In the distance, dark clouds gather, swirling ominously, as if heralding the arrival of something far worse. The archaeologist stumbles as he walks, his steps heavy, his shoulders slumped. knowing that there is no escape from what he has unleashed. And so he wandered into the darkness. The voice concludes, filled with a profound sadness. A man lost in a world he no longer recognized, hunted by the very evil he had sought to uncover. The relic was gone, but its curse lived on, and the world would never be the same. The screen fades to black, the last sound a distant rumble of thunder, as if the heavens themselves are mourning the loss of the world to the darkness that now reigns. The story ends not with a sense of closure, but with the haunting realization that the evil unleashed is far from defeated, and that the true terror lies in what is yet to come. The camera opens to a scene of eerie calm, a stark contrast to the chaos that preceded it. The archaeologist, having fled from the ruins of his home, now finds himself in a small, nondescript town, far removed from the site of his discovery. But the tranquility of the town is deceptive, a fragile veneer that barely conceals the darkness that has taken root in his soul. He moves through the streets like a ghost, his once vibrant and curious mind now hollowed out by the horrors he has unleashed. The townsfolk pay him little attention, unaware the man walking among them has brought a curse upon the world. He tried to escape. The voice narrates, laced with a quiet despair, tried to outrun the shadows that haunted his every step. But no matter how far he went, the darkness followed, a constant presence that tainted everything it touched. The archaeologist rents a room in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, a place as forgotten as he wishes to be. The room is sparse, the walls yellowed with the age, the furniture creaking under the weight of years of neglect. But to him, it is a sanctuary, the last place he can hide from the world and from himself. The camera lingers on him as he sits on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, his hands trembling slightly. He has tried to convince himself that he is safe here, that the relic's curse is tied to the place where it was found, but deep down, he knows better. The darkness is inside him now, woven into the fabric of his being, and there is no escaping it. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small mirror, the glass cracked and smeared with dirt. Hesitantly, he looks at his reflection, expecting to see the haunted, hollow-eyed man he has become. But what he saw in the mirror was far worse. The voice whispers, the tension rising as the scene unfolds. It was not his own face that stared back at him, but something else. Something darker. Something that should not exist in this world. The camera zooms in on the mirror, revealing a face that is twisted and grotesque, barely recognizable as human. The eyes, once filled with fear, are now dark voids, empty of all emotion, as if the soul within has been consumed by the darkness. The reflection grins at him, a mocking, sinister smile that sends a jolt of terror through his body. The archaeologist drops the mirror with a gasp, the glass shattering on the floor. He backs away, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts, as if he has seen the embodiment of all his fears in that reflection. He knows now that the darkness has fully taken root within him, warping his very identity, turning him into something else, something monstrous. The realization is like a knife twisting in his gut, the final blow that shatters what little sanity he has left. He clutches his head, the weight of his despair overwhelming him. There was no escape, no sanctuary from the darkness. The voice continues. It had taken hold of him, body and soul, and it would not rest until it had consumed every last shred of the man he once was. The camera shows him curled up on the bed, rocking back and forth, his mind unraveling as he is haunted by the memories of what he has unleashed. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the creature's burning gaze, feels its cold breath on his neck, hears the whispers that once tormented him. He knows that this is his fate now, to live in perpetual fear, haunted by the darkness he could not control. But as the days pass, the terror gives way to something else. Resignation. The archaeologist stops fighting, stops running. He becomes a shell of a man, his mind shattered, his body worn down by the relentless fear. He barely eats, barely sleeps, moving through life in a daze, waiting for the inevitable end. The darkness within him grows stronger, feeding on his despair, twisting his thoughts into something unrecognizable. He begins to hear the whispers again, but this time, they are no longer distant. They are inside his mind, speaking directly to him. He began to lose himself. The voice narrates, the tone softening into something almost mournful. The line between reality and nightmare blurred until he could no longer tell them apart. The man he once was, the man who had sought knowledge and discovery, was gone, replaced by something else, something far darker. The camera shows him wandering through the town late at night, his eyes glazed over, his movements mechanical. The streets are empty, silent, save for the occasional rustle of wind. But to him, they are alive with shadows, figures that move just out of sight, watching him, waiting for him to finally succumb. He returns to his motel room, locking the door behind him as if that could keep the darkness at bay. But it's already inside, waiting for him in the shadows. The room feels smaller now, the walls closing in, the air thick with the scent of decay. He sits on the bed, staring blankly at the wall, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. They tell him things, dark, twisted things, secrets that no human mind should ever know. And the more he listens, the more he feels himself slipping away, his identity dissolving into the darkness.